The words still echo in my mind, a chilling symphony of casual cruelty. You are such a pain in the butt and a hassle. California RL. They were uttered by my mother, Eleanor Vance, a woman who once cooed lullabies to me, her firstborn. That night, her voice, usually a melodic instrument of practiced charm, was sharp, dismissive, laced with an irritation reserved for an inconvenient chore. I stood in a sterile hospital corridor, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the antiseptic scent clinging to my clothes like a shroud. It was 11:30 p.m. A minute earlier, I had watched, helpless, as nurses rushed my wife Clara, a dedicated pediatric nurse herself, into emergency surgery. Her ruptured appendix had exploded into a raging peritonitis. Words like sepsis and touch and go thrown casually by the grim-faced surgeon, tearing through my composure like shrapnel. My hands shook as I gripped my phone, the plastic warm and slick with sweat. Our 4-year-old twin boys, Liam and Noah, were at home, blissfully asleep, or so I hoped. Our usual babysitter, Mrs. Gable, a kind, elderly woman from down the street, had agreed to stay for a few hours, but she had an early morning shift at the community center. She couldn't stay the night. I was stranded, my mind racing, desperately trying to conjure a solution, anyone, to watch my precious boys while Clara fought for her life. My parents, Eleanor and Richard Vance, lived a mere 20 minutes away, in a charming suburban house in the Willow Creek subdivision of Denver, Colorado. It was a house I had personally helped them secure 3 years earlier, a quiet suburban haven nestled amidst towering ponderosa pines. Their previous home, a sprawling, slightly dilapidated Victorian, had been lost to foreclosure after my father's boutique artisanal furniture business, Rustic Roots Refinishing, had spectacularly imploded. A series of ill-advised investments, combined with Richard's penchant for extravagant, unmarketable designs and Eleanor's chronic overspending on what she deemed essential brand-building experiences, had bled their savings dry. The business, despite my repeated warnings about market saturation and unsustainable overhead, had dissolved into a mountain of debt and a final acrimonious bankruptcy, leaving them with little more than shattered pride and a vague sense of victimhood. I had stepped in, not because they asked, but because I felt it was my duty. I was Carl Vance, a senior architectural designer at Sterling & Stone, one of Denver's most prestigious firms. My days were spent meticulously crafting blueprints for luxury high-rises and innovative commercial spaces, my mind trained to anticipate every structural weakness, every potential flaw. I thrived on order, on precision, on building things that lasted. My salary, combined with Clara's steady income as a nurse, allowed us a comfortable life, but it also bore the silent burden of my parents' constant need. For 3 years, I had quietly funneled $2,000 into their account every single month. It covered their rent, their utilities, and the inexplicable expenses that always seemed to arise. A new artisanal coffee maker, a vintage garden gnome collection, a wellness retreat that turned out to be a glorified spa weekend in Aspen. I put them on my family's cell phone plan, absorbing the cost of their data-heavy streaming habits. I paid for their car insurance, ensuring their vintage Mercedes sedan, an emblem of their rapidly fading former glory, remained on the road. When my mother needed extensive dental work, a consequence, she claimed, of stress-induced enamel erosion, I covered the 5-figure bill without a word of complaint. They never explicitly asked for these things. No. I offered because I truly believed that was what a good son did. That was the unspoken contract of family, wasn't it? To show up, to provide, to be the bedrock when everyone else crumbled. My younger brother, Marcus, a self-proclaimed disruptor in the fledgling crypto art scene, occasionally sent them a sporadic, smaller sum, usually when one of his highly speculative digital ventures, briefly, miraculously, saw a marginal return. But his contributions were always inconsistent, unpredictable, more grand gestured than a reliable lifeline. He had his own life, his own problems, his own carefully curated image as a bohemian tech visionary. I never resented him for it. Marcus was Marcus. He floated through life on a cloud of charm and unearned optimism, and my parents, seemingly impervious to his repeated failures, adored him for it. They spoke of his vision, his boldness, his entrepreneurial spirit, completely ignoring the fact that his ventures invariably ended in digital ashes, leaving behind a trail of bewildered investors and vague promises. I, the steady architect, the builder of tangible structures, was simply reliable. Our rock, darling, Mom would often say, a patronizing pat on my arm that felt more like a possessive claim. So grounded. We always know where you stand. The warning signs had been there, little tremors beneath the surface of our seemingly stable family dynamic, stretching back decades, almost to my earliest memories. As a child, I learned early on that the world revolved around Marcus, or more accurately, around my parents' perception of Marcus. I remembered being 6 years old, proudly presenting my meticulously crafted papier-mâché volcano for the first grade science fair. It was a marvel of engineering, erupting with baking soda and vinegar exactly as a volcano should. My parents had offered a quick, "That's nice, dear, very volcanic," before their attention snapped back to Marcus, then 4, who had smeared paint across a canvas in what they declared to be his first abstract expressionist piece. They'd invited half the neighborhood over to admire his finger painting, gushing about his untapped genius, while my volcano sat forgotten on the kitchen table, its potential for eruption unnoticed. Throughout my school years, the pattern solidified. I brought home straight A's, won academic competitions, excelled in high school debate. My achievements were met with a perfunctory, "Good job, Carl, now help your father with the garage," or a dismissive, "Of course you did well, Carl, you always do." Marcus, meanwhile, might squeak by with a C+ in art class, and it would be hailed as showing his creative spirit, or a sign he thinks outside the box. My parents rarely attended my soccer games or debate tournaments, always citing unavoidable clashes or feeling a bit under the weather. Yet, if Marcus decided to try a new hobby for a fleeting 2 weeks, be it pottery or skateboarding, they were there, cameras flashing, cheering him on with disproportionate enthusiasm, often buying him the most expensive equipment before he inevitably lost interest. I internalized it. I became the good son, the reliable one. If something needed fixing, if someone needed help, if there was a problem, Carl was the answer. I pursued architecture, a field of precision and tangible results, perhaps as a subconscious rebellion against the chaos and superficiality that often surrounded my family. My university years were a grind. I worked tirelessly through scholarships and part-time jobs. While Marcus seemed to drift through a more leisurely college experience, his expenses miraculously covered by some vague family trust that I later realized was largely funded by my own burgeoning income. When I landed my first job at Sterling & Stone, my initial pride was quickly tempered by my parents' immediate shift in perspective. My salary wasn't a testament to my hard work, it was a new resource for them. The subtle requests for loans or gifts for their various failed ventures began. I remembered an instance where my father, Richard, had insisted on investing in a limited edition collection of vintage fountain pens, convinced they would quadruple in value. He borrowed $15,000 from me, promising repayment as soon as the market shifts. The market never shifted, and the pens ended up gathering dust in the display case, their value plummeting. The loan was never repaid, never mentioned again. It was just another cost absorbed by reliable Carl. Clara, with her clear-eyed compassion and no-nonsense pragmatism, saw through it all much earlier than I did. She gently tried to open my eyes, her brows furrowed with concern. "Carl, they never ask about you. It's always about them. Don't you see how they treat Marcus differently?" I'd make excuses, rationalize their behavior, clinging to the belief that beneath the veneer of selfishness, there was still a kernel of parental love for me. She'd sigh, a quiet, knowing sigh, and drop the subject, but her quiet dismay at their selfishness was palpable. The warning signs escalated into full-blown red flags. When Clara passed her rigorous nursing board exams, a culmination of years of hard work, my parents sent a brief, generic text message, "Congrats." When she got a promotion to lead pediatric nurse, a significant career achievement, they barely acknowledged it, their conversation quickly veering back to Marcus's latest, equally vague, venture in digital soundscapes. The twins' second birthday was a particular flashpoint. Liam had a severe allergic reaction to something in the cake, a new experimental recipe my mother had insisted on bringing, despite my repeated warnings about his known nut allergy. While Clara frantically administered his EpiPen and I rushed Liam to the emergency room, terrified. My parents had been more concerned about the ruined birthday party and the waste of the cake. "Oh dear, such a shame," Mom had fretted. Not about Liam's swollen face and struggling breath, but about the half-eaten cake. And I spent so much time on that frosting. They barely asked about Liam's condition, focusing instead on rescheduling the party and expressing disappointment about the disruption to their meticulously planned weekend. Just last month, I'd mentioned Clara was experiencing persistent abdominal pain, a worry that had kept me up at night. Mom's response? "Oh dear. Well, I hope it's not contagious." Richard and I are planning our annual cruise to the Caribbean next month, and we simply can't risk anything. My concerns, my wife's health, were merely inconveniences to their meticulously planned leisure. The cold disregard had pricked me, but I had, as always, suppressed the hurt. And then, tonight, the call. The world tilted on its axis, and every suppressed hurt, every ignored slight, every painful realization rushed to the surface. Act 2. The breaking point. The evening had begun like any other. Claire and I had put the boys to bed, Liam insisting on one more story about a brave night, Noah demanding a final cuddle. We had settled on the couch, exhausted but content, talking about our day, the small victories and frustrations of work. Then, the pain had started. A sharp, searing agony that made Clara, usually so stoic and resilient, gasp and double over. As a nurse, she'd initially tried to dismiss it, probably just gas, honey, or something I ate. But the pain rapidly intensified, growing from a dull ache to a relentless, throbbing fire that spread across her abdomen. Her face, usually so vibrant, turned ashen, beaded with sweat. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. My heart had begun to pound a frantic rhythm in my chest. This wasn't gas. This was something far more terrifying. "Clara, we need to go to the ER. Now." My voice was clipped, urgent, laced with a fear I tried desperately to suppress. She nodded, unable to speak, her eyes squeezed shut. The drive to the hospital was a blur. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, pushing the speed limit, my eyes darting between the road and Clara, who sat hunched over, murmuring soft whimpers of pain. The city lights streaked past, a kaleidoscope of blurred colors, as I mentally replayed every first aid lesson, every emergency scenario I'd ever heard. Just get her there, Carl. Just get her there. The emergency room was a cacophony of controlled chaos. Harsh fluorescent lights, the antiseptic tang of disinfectant mixed with faint traces of blood and sickness, the low murmur of worried conversations, punctuated by sudden bursts of activity. Nurses and doctors moved with a practiced urgency, their faces grim, their voices clipped. Clara was rushed in, a whirlwind of white coats and gurneys. I was left in the waiting room, adrift in a sea of strangers, each clinging to their own fragile hope or despair. An hour later, a surgeon, his face etched with fatigue, his eyes serious, approached me. "Mr. Vance, your wife, Clara. It's an acute appendicitis. It ruptured. There's significant peritonitis and we're seeing signs of early sepsis. We're taking her to surgery immediately. It's touch and go." The words hit me like a physical blow. Sepsis, touch and go. My world narrowed to those three terrifying words. My beautiful, vibrant Clara. My rock. The mother of my children. Her life hanging by a thread. I felt a cold dread spread through my chest, chilling me to the bone, the sense of unreality pressing in. I wanted to be with her, to hold her hand, but I was useless here. My only purpose was to wait, and to secure the care of my children. My first thought was Mrs. Gable. She was a lifesaver, but she had her own responsibilities. I'd called her as soon as Clara's pain had become undeniable, knowing she'd come without hesitation. But she had a shift at the community center, managing the senior exercise classes, and she had to be there by 6 a.m. She couldn't stay the night. My parents were only 20 minutes away. They were retired, their schedule flexible. They knew the boys had supposedly doted on them. This was what family was for, wasn't it? To step up in a crisis. This was their chance to prove they were more than just names on a Christmas card. This was their chance to be parents, not just recipients of my endless financial support. My hands trembled as I dialed my mother's number. It It was 11:30 p.m. Her phone rang several times before she answered, her voice thick with sleep-induced annoyance. "Mom, it's Carl," I'd begun, my voice strained, hoarse with panic, trying to keep the tremors from rattling through the phone. "Clara's in emergency surgery. It's bad. The twins are home, but Mrs. Gable has to leave by 6 a.m. I need someone to stay with them, just until morning." A beat of silence. Then a sigh. A heavy, put-upon sigh, as if I had just asked her to climb Mount Everest barefoot. "Carl, darling, do you know what time it is?" My mother's voice, usually so smooth and reassuring, was sharp, annoyed. "It's almost midnight. And your father and I, and your brother Marcus, we have tickets to see Fleetwood Mac tonight. It's the reunion tour. We've been planning this for months." Marcus drove all the way from Seattle specifically for this concert. My mind reeled. Fleetwood Mac, a concert, over my wife's life, over their grandchildren's fear. The absurdity of it was suffocating. "Mom," I pleaded, my voice cracking, "Clara is in surgery. The doctor said it's sepsis, that it's touch and go. Liam and Noah are home, but Mrs. Gable can't stay. Please, just until morning. It's only a few hours. The boys, they need someone familiar." I was desperate, trying every angle, appealing to any shred of grandparental instinct I thought they might possess. "The boys will be so scared if they wake up and no one they know is there. Liam keeps asking for you. Mom, he loves your lullabies. Noah just learned to say Grandpa so clearly, he'd be so happy to see you." I was practically begging, humiliating myself, my voice rising in pitch, a frantic, desperate plea in the quiet, sterile corridor. My mother let out another exasperated sigh. "Carl, don't be dramatic. People have appendicitis all the time. It's hardly a death sentence. And honestly, we've had these tickets for months. They were incredibly expensive. Marcus flew all this way just for this. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event. You know how much your father loves their guitar solos? Mom, please. This isn't about guitar solos. This is about family, about your daughter-in-law fighting for her life, about your grandchildren." Then my father's gruff voice boomed from the background, devoid of any sympathy, his words cutting through the line like ice. "Call a babysitter, Carl. That's what they're for. We are not missing this show for some routine medical procedure. And frankly, Carl, you are being such a pain in the butt and a hassle calling at this hour, making such a fuss." The words hung in the air, echoing in the cavernous space of the hospital corridor. Pain in the butt and a hassle. It wasn't the anger that broke me, or even the blatant disregard for Clara's life. It was the casual, dismissive tone, the utter lack of compassion, the realization that I was, to them, nothing more than an inconvenience, a perpetual obligation. In that moment, a fundamental chord snapped within me. A lifetime of unspoken duties, of suppressed expectations, of desperate hopes for their approval, all came crashing down. The very foundation of my relationship with them, which I had so diligently shored up, had just crumbled. I felt physically ill, a wave of nausea washing over me, my vision blurring at the edges. I hung up without another word. There was nothing left to say. The line went dead, the silence on my end deafening, more final than any argument could have been. I called Mrs. Gable back. Bless her heart, she was already getting her things ready, her voice laced with genuine concern for Clara and for me. "Oh dear, of course I'll stay, for as long as you need me. Your parents, well, never mind, you just focus on Clara." Her unspoken judgment hung in the air, a silent testament to their monstrous selfishness. I explained the situation, promising to find an overnight solution. I spent another frantic 20 minutes on the phone, calling every babysitting service I could find, desperate, humiliated, offering triple the usual rate. I was so exhausted, my mind a fog, my hands still shaking. Finally, a weary-sounding young woman agreed. I paid her $300 for the overnight shift. $300, a paltry sum in the grand scheme of things, but in that moment, it felt like the price of my dignity, the cost of my parents' heartless indifference. The next few hours were a blur of agonizing waiting. I sat in the silent, cold waiting room, staring at the muted television screen, listening to the rhythmic beeping of unseen machines, my mind replaying their words, their tone. Fleetwood Mac. Over my family, over a life. The clarity solidified, hardening into something brittle and unyielding. The sun began to creep through the narrow waiting room window, casting long, pale shadows across the linoleum floor. The world was waking up, but mine felt shattered. Act 3. The Architect of Severance. Clara survived. The surgery lasted 4 grueling hours, each minute stretching into an eternity. She spent 2 days in intensive care, wired to machines, pale and weak, before they moved her to a regular room. I never left her side, sleeping in a stiff hospital chair, my only breaks to call Mrs. Gable or the sitter or to check on the boys. My parents never called. Not once. Not to check on Clara, not to ask about their grandchildren, not even a perfunctory text message. The silence was louder, more profound than any shouted accusation. It was the silence of absolute indifference. On the 3rd day, when Clara was finally coherent and strong enough to talk, she looked at me, her eyes still a little hazy from the medication. The boys, are they okay? Did you find someone? Her voice was a fragile whisper. I nodded, gently squeezing her hand. They're fine, honey. Mrs. Gable stayed for a bit, then I found an overnight sitter. I hesitated, then decided to tell her the unvarnished truth. I called Mom and Dad first. Clara's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something between understanding and pain. And I took a deep breath. They were going to a Fleetwood Mac concert with Marcus. They said I was a pain in the butt and a hassle for calling. Said it was just an appendix, and they weren't going to miss their show. Clara's hand, which had been resting limply in mine, tightened almost imperceptibly. A tear escaped the corner of her eye, tracing a path down her temple into her hair. It wasn't a tear of self-pity, but of quiet heartbreak and a profound, shared realization. In that moment, she understood the depth of my parents' cruelty and the burden I had carried for so long. She didn't need to say anything. Her silence, her tear, spoke volumes. From that moment, I knew I had her unwavering support for whatever decision I made. 3 days after Clara was moved out of ICU, a text message finally arrived. From my mother. Not a question about Clara's recovery. Not an inquiry about Liam or Noah. Just, are we still on for Sunday dinner? Richard wants to grill those steaks he bought. I stared at that text for a long time. The audacity. The sheer, breathtaking oblivion. It was as if the past 6 days, the frantic calls, the life-threatening surgery, the abandoned grandchildren simply hadn't happened. My initial numbness, born of shock and exhaustion, had given way to a cold, precise fury. Not the explosive kind, but the calculated, methodical kind. Like an architect, I was designing a structure for demolition, brick by painful brick. I deleted the text without replying. Then, I deleted their contact information from my phone. I unsubscribed them from our family cell phone plan. I removed them from my car insurance policy. I quietly began the process of severing every financial tie. The decision was not made in anger, not truly. It was made with the methodical precision of an architect designing a structure for demolition. I was not destroying them. I was simply removing the foundation I had so generously provided, the foundation they had come to take for granted, assuming it was an immutable part of the landscape. I was dismantling the safety net, piece by painstaking piece. The small things they had done over the years, the subtle slights, the casual neglect, now coalesced into a damning pattern. I remembered Clara's first Mother's Day after the twins were born. My parents had been too tired to drive the hour to our house, instead sending a generic card and a gift certificate for a chain restaurant. Meanwhile, they drove 3 hours the very next weekend to attend Marcus's pop-up digital art installation in a warehouse district, gushing about his innovative spirit and boundary-pushing creativity. They had taken the twins only once, to the zoo, only to complain the entire time about the smell, the crowds, and the cost of the mediocre hot dogs. They made it clear they were doing me a favor, not enjoying time with their grandchildren. My firm, Sterling & Stone, had just landed its largest contract to date, the revitalization of the entire downtown waterfront, a multi-billion-dollar project that would redefine my career. I'd excitedly call my parents, hoping for a moment of shared pride, a genuine celebration of my years of hard work. My father's response? "Oh, that's great, Carl. You know, your mother and I were just thinking, with all that money coming in, maybe you could finally get us that new European luxury car we've been looking at. The old Mercedes is starting to show its age, you know. No congratulations, just a thinly veiled demand, a blatant expectation that my success was merely a conduit for their desires. The pattern was clear. I was their utility, their ATM, their reliable, ever-present backup plan, a fallback when Marcus's grand schemes inevitably imploded or when their own self-indulgence led them to financial ruin. They celebrated Marcus's potential, his fleeting moments of perceived brilliance, while my tangible, consistent successes were simply expected, a baseline for their continued comfort. I was the sturdy oak, taken for granted, while Marcus was the exotic, fragile orchid, showered with attention and lavish care. I began to meticulously document everything. As an architectural designer, I lived by details, by contracts, by the cold, hard logic of numbers and legal precedents. I compiled a detailed ledger of every payment, every bill I had covered, every financial aid I had extended. The sum was staggering. Over $72,000 in direct payments for rent and expenses alone, not counting the insurance, medical bills, or countless other incidentals. This wasn't just a favor. It was a substantial, ongoing subsidy. I consulted with a trusted attorney, Miss Evelyn Reed, a sharp, no-nonsense woman specializing in estate and family law. Her office was minimalist, sleek, much like a modern architectural firm, which instantly put me at ease. I laid out the facts, the medical emergency, their refusal, the years of financial support, presenting her with a neatly organized binder of financial records. Her expression, initially empathetic, hardened into one of professional resolve as she flipped through the pages. "Carl," she said, her voice firm, "you are not obligated to support them. And frankly, their actions during Claire's emergency are not just callous. They border on negligence, especially given their role as grandparents." She paused, then added, "Your documentation is impeccable. This isn't just about cutting off support. It's about reclaiming your life from financial and emotional exploitation. You have a very strong case for asserting your boundaries." I instructed her to draft a formal letter. It was cold, clinical, and precise. It detailed the cessation of all financial support, effective immediately. It outlined the exact date and reason for the termination of each service I had provided. The cell phone plan, the car insurance. It contained no anger, no recrimination, just facts. It was the architectural equivalent of removing load-bearing walls from a structure that had grown dependent on them. No emotional language. I had told Miss Reed, just the facts. They understand facts. Or at least, they'll be forced to. I chose a Monday morning to have the letter delivered. I imagined them sipping their morning coffee, perhaps discussing Marcus's latest crypto art endeavor, completely oblivious. The shock I knew would be profound. The calls started that afternoon. First, from my mother. Her voice, usually composed, was trembling, laced with disbelief. "Carl, what is this? This letter from a lawyer? What on earth is going on? Why have you cut off our phone? We can't even call Marcus. We can't even stream our favorite shows. This is outrageous." Her voice rose, tinged with outrage, the tremors giving way to indignant fury. "It's all explained in the letter, Mom," I said. My voice steady, devoid of emotion, a tone I had practiced in my head countless times. "I'm no longer able to provide financial support." But why? "We need that money, Carl. You know your father's business failed. We rely on that. This is completely unacceptable. How do you expect us to live? Do you want us to starve?" She shrieked, escalating the drama, pulling out every manipulation tactic she'd ever used. "When Clara was fighting for her life in surgery, and I called you for help with your grandchildren, you told me I was a pain in the butt and a hassle. And to call a babysitter because you didn't want to miss a concert, I stated each word slow, deliberate, cutting through her manufactured outrage. You chose a concert over family. That choice has consequences, Mom. This is one of them." "That's not fair. It was one night." And Marcus was in town. You're overreacting. We're your parents, Carl. We raised you. We made sacrifices for you. We deserve your support. My father's gruff voice, rough and accusatory, joined the fray. This is blackmail, Carl. We'll sue you. We'll expose you for the heartless son you are. You're welcome to try, I replied calmly. I have meticulous records of every payment, every conversation, and Claire's medical records from that night. My attorney, Miss Reed, is well aware of the situation. I have fulfilled my obligations and then some. Now, I am simply choosing to prioritize my own family, Clara and the boys, and our financial security. And I will not be swayed by threats or emotional manipulation. The calls continued for days, escalating in intensity. They tried anger, then desperate pleas, then guilt trips. They referenced my childhood, all the sacrifices we made, the late nights we stayed up, conveniently forgetting the years of neglect and favoritism. I remained steadfast, a stone wall against their tidal wave of recrimination. They enlisted my aunt, my grandmother, even distant cousins, who called bewildered, expressing their concern and urging me to reconsider for the sake of family. Each call was a new confrontation, a fresh opportunity to disseminate the truth. I calmly explained the situation to each of them, sticking to the facts, recounting the night in the hospital, my voice unwavering. Most of them were stunned into silence, a dawning realization on their end. A few expressed quiet understanding, even admiration for my courage. A handful, however, sided with my parents, condemning my heartlessness and accusing me of abandoning my elderly parents. I cut those ties too. If you condone their behavior, then I have nothing further to discuss with you, I'd state and promptly hang up. My social circle, once burdened by these tenuous, draining connections, began to feel lighter, freer. Marcus even called, "Dude, what's up with mom and dad? They're freaking out, says you cut them off. What's the deal?" His voice was casual, almost amused, as if this were some minor family drama rather than a profound betrayal. He sounded like a curious bystander, not a concerned brother. The deal is, they chose a concert over my family during an emergency, I explained. My patients wearing thin, the last vestiges of brotherly affection draining away. And I'm no longer financially responsible for them. They'll have to manage their own affairs, just like adult human beings. Whoa, easy there, bro. It was just Fleetwood Mac. It's not like Clara died. You're being totally unreasonable. They're your parents. His words were like a physical blow, a chilling echo of my parents' casual disregard, revealing the rotten core of his own character. No, she didn't die, Marcus, I said, my voice barely a whisper, thick with restrained fury. But she could have. And while she was fighting for her life, and our children were terrified and alone, Mom and Dad decided a concert was more important. That tells me everything I need to know about what family means to them. And about what family means to you, apparently. You're no better than them. You're just a more palatable version of their selfishness. Marcus sputtered, tried to defend himself, then mumbled something about adulting being hard and quickly hung up. He never truly understood. He was too deeply entrenched in their shared narrative of self-entitlement and perpetual victimhood. That was the last I ever heard from him. A final, definitive severing of the tie that had always been thin, held together more by obligation than genuine affection. Act 4. The consequences and rebirth. The consequences for my parents were swift and brutal. Without my monthly payments, they couldn't afford the rent on their charming house in Willow Creek. The landlord, a no-nonsense property manager, initiated eviction proceedings. They called me, frantic, desperate, begging for just one more month, promising to figure something out. I held firm. You showed me your priorities, Mom and Dad. Now you have to live with them. My voice was calm but resolute. I was no longer their savior. The eviction process was humiliating for them. The formal notices, the increasing desperation in their calls, their futile attempts to find new sources of income, their constant blaming of me, I remained unyielding. The day the movers came, I heard from a former neighbor that Eleanor had tried to maintain her composure, directing the movers with an air of false importance, but her eyes had been red-rimmed and her usual vivaciousness had been replaced by a grim, pinched expression. Richard, apparently, had spent the day muttering angrily to himself, occasionally shouting at the movers for handling his artisanal furniture too roughly. It was a public spectacle of their private downfall. They were forced to sell their beloved vintage Mercedes, then most of their furniture, including some of Richard's artisanal pieces that surprisingly fetched a decent price at auction, allowing them to afford the deposit for their new place. They moved into a small, cramped apartment in a less desirable part of town, miles from their old social circle, miles from the manicured lawns and ponderosa pines of Willow Creek. The area was loud, the apartment smaller, the neighbors less refined than their carefully curated social set. Richard, once the proud, if misguided entrepreneur, took a part-time job as a handyman for a local apartment complex, enduring condescending clients and meager pay. Eleanor, who had never worked a day in her life outside of social engagements and brand consulting for Richard's doomed business, found sporadic work as a receptionist at a local community center, often complaining about the unbearable noise and the unpleasant people she had to interact with. The transition was agonizing for them, a constant source of bitterness and recrimination, each blaming the other for their downfall, never once acknowledging their own selfishness or their role in alienating their own son. Their carefully constructed facade of upper-middle-class comfort crumbled, revealing the fragile, entitled individuals beneath. 6 months later, Clara was fully recovered, her strength returning, her spirit unbroken. The twins, Liam and Noah, bright-eyed and energetic, started kindergarten, thriving in their new environment. My career at Sterling and Stone soared. I was promoted to senior partner, my vision and leadership now shaping the firm's most ambitious projects. The burden lifted from my shoulders had given me a renewed focus, a clarity of purpose I hadn't realized was missing. We bought a larger house, a beautiful, sprawling, ranch-style home in a top-rated school district, with a sprawling backyard perfect for the boys to play in. It was a home built on genuine effort, mutual respect, and unwavering support, not on the shifting sands of obligation and manipulation. My parents never met our new neighbors. They never saw the boys' new school or helped them with homework or attended their soccer games. They never knew the joy of watching Liam score his first goal or Noah recite his first poem on stage. They had chosen their priorities, and I had chosen mine. Their absence became a quiet, palpable peace in our home. Epilogue. The true meaning of family? Sometimes Clara would ask if I missed them. I would tell her the truth, a truth that had taken root in the desolate waiting room of a hospital, a truth that had grown strong and unyielding through the pain of betrayal and the quiet strength of my resolve. I missed the parents I thought I had, I would say, my voice tinged with a faint, lingering sadness, a ghost of a past attachment. The parents who would have rushed to my side, the parents who would have prioritized their grandchildren over a concert, the parents who would have supported me, not just taken from me. I would pause, remembering the sharp, dismissive tone, the cutting words, "You are such a pain in the butt and a hassle." But I don't miss the people who called me a hassle during the worst night of our lives. I don't miss the people who showed me so clearly who they truly were when it mattered most. The twins stopped asking about grandma and grandpa after a few months. Children adapt quickly when adults make their boundaries clear. They learn to rely on the love and unwavering presence of Clara and me, and the growing circle of friends and genuinely supportive extended family members who valued our little family for who we were, not what we could provide. Mrs. Gable became a cherished honorary grandma, her gentle kindness a stark contrast to the Vance's cold indifference. This lesson cost me something? Yes, it cost me over $72,000 in direct payments, plus countless other expenses, a substantial sum of money I could have invested differently. It cost me two parents, in a way, the version of them I had stubbornly clung to for decades. But it taught me a far more valuable lesson. It taught me exactly what my family was truly worth. Not the family I was born into, but the family I chose, the family I built, the family that showed up when it mattered. Family isn't about blood or obligation. It is about showing up when it matters. Even when it's inconvenient, even when you have other plans, even when you would rather be somewhere else. It is about empathy, sacrifice, and unconditional love. It is about being a bedrock, not a drain. So, to anyone who finds themselves in a similar bind, trapped in a cycle of giving and being taken for granted, hear this message from my heart. Do not be afraid to dismantle the safety net if it is only serving to catch others' failures while you fall. Do not let sentimentality blind you to disrespect. True strength isn't about enduring endless abuse. It's about drawing lines, setting boundaries, and choosing your own well-being. It's about recognizing when love becomes obligation, and obligation becomes exploitation. It's about understanding that sometimes the most profound act of self-love is also the most difficult act of letting go. I learned that freedom isn't just about financial independence, it's about emotional liberation. It's about being free from the weight of expectations, the sting of casual cruelty, and the endless cycle of unreciprocated effort. It's about building a life, a family, a legacy on foundations of respect, integrity, and genuine connection. And when you finally stand firm, unyielding in your truth, you'll find that the true wealth lies not in what you possess, but in the peace you find and the people who truly show up for you, no matter what concert is playing. I lost some family, but I gained myself and a far stronger, more loving family in return. And that, I assure you, is a victory beyond measure. The scars of betrayal remained, faint but present, reminders of the battle fought and won. But they were overshadowed by the profound sense of peace, self-worth, and unshakable freedom I had found. I learned that true strength isn't about being unscarred, but about how you carry your scars, how you transform pain into purpose. The message I carry, the wisdom etched into my very soul, is this: never let others define your worth. Never allow kindness to be mistaken for weakness. And never, ever let anyone take what is rightfully yours, your dignity, your peace, your self-respect, just because they are called family. Sometimes the most powerful act of love is also the most powerful act of self-preservation. When you finally stand your ground, when you dare to say no to injustice, even when it comes from your own blood, you don't just reclaim your property or your finances. You reclaim control over your entire life. And that, I assure you, is the most profound victory of all. I had given them what they truly deserved, the opportunity to live with the consequences of their own choices, unburdened by my silent strength. And in doing so, I had finally given myself what I truly deserved, a life lived on my own terms, free and whole. The silence they sought to impose on me became the very space where my truth could finally, gloriously bloom.